In the tapestry of life, waiting is a thread intricately woven into the fabric of our existence. It's a concept both universal and deeply personal, touching every aspect of human experience. Waiting tests our patience, challenges our faith, and often confronts us with uncertainty. Yet, within the Christian worldview, waiting takes on a profound significance, an invitation to trust God even in the most difficult of times or seasons. At the heart of Christian motivation lies the foundational belief in a sovereign and loving God, a God who transcends time and space, whose wisdom surpasses our understanding, and whose purposes unfold according to His perfect will. This belief forms the bedrock upon which the Christian stands when confronted with seasons of waiting. In the midst of waiting, whether it be for healing, provision, guidance, or fulfillment of promises, the Christian is called to anchor their trust in God. It's a trust that defies the logic of human reasoning and transcends the limitations of temporal perspective. It's a trust that acknowledges God's sovereignty, even when circumstances seem to scream otherwise. The Bible, the authoritative guide for Christian belief and practice, is replete with examples of individuals who navigated seasons of waiting with unwavering trust in God. Abraham and Sarah waited decades for the fulfillment of God's promise of a son. Joseph endured years of betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before seeing the fulfillment of his dreams. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years before entering the Promised Land. In each of these accounts, waiting was not merely a passive endurance of time but an active expression of trust in God's faithfulness. Yet, trusting God in the waiting is not a passive resignation to fate. It's a deliberate choice to align one's will with God's, to surrender control, and to embrace His timing as sovereign and perfect. It's a choice that requires humility, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to seek God's will above all else. In the crucible of waiting, faith is refined, character is forged, and spiritual maturity is cultivated. It's a process that often involves wrestling with doubts, wrestling with fears, and wrestling with God Himself. Yet, it's in the wrestling that faith is strengthened, doubts are dispelled, and intimacy with God is deepened. Moreover, trusting God in the waiting is an act of worship, an acknowledgement of His goodness, His faithfulness, and His unchanging nature. It's a declaration that our hope is not anchored in fleeting circumstances but in the unshakable character of God Himself. It's a posture of surrender that invites God to work in ways beyond our comprehension, to orchestrate beauty from ashes, and to bring about redemption in the midst of brokenness. In the words of the psalmist, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord," Psalm 27 verse 14, NIV. This admonition encapsulates the essence of Christian motivation in difficult seasons: to wait with strength, to wait with courage, and to wait with unwavering trust in the goodness of God. Ultimately, trusting God in the waiting is an invitation to participate in His redemptive story, a story that spans the ages, encompasses the entirety of human experience, and culminates in the hope of eternity. It's a journey marked by twists and turns, highs and lows, joys and sorrows. Yet, through it all, God remains faithful, His promises remain true, and His love remains steadfast. So, in the midst of waiting, in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of difficulty, may we echo the words of the prophet Isaiah, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, they shall mount up with wings as eagles, they shall run, and not be weary, and they shall walk, and not faint." Isaiah 40 verse 31, KJV. May we trust God with our waiting, even in the most difficult of times or seasons, knowing that He is ever present, ever faithful, and ever worthy of our trust. In the corridors of history, we find echoes of this divine invitation to trust amidst waiting. Consider the story of Job, who endured unimaginable suffering and loss, yet clung to his faith in God's righteousness and sovereignty. Or the tale of the Israelites, whose journey from slavery to the Promised Land was punctuated by years of wandering in the wilderness, a period of waiting that tested their faith and revealed the depth of God's provision and guidance. Likewise, in the New Testament, we encounter the Apostle Paul, whose life was marked by seasons of waiting, adversity, and uncertainty. Yet, in his letter to the Romans, he writes, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Romans 8 verse 28, NIV. These words serve as a beacon of hope, reminding believers that even in the darkest of times, God is at work, weaving together the threads of our waiting into a tapestry of redemption and restoration. Trusting God in the waiting requires an intentional cultivation of spiritual disciplines, prayer, meditation on Scripture, fellowship with other believers, that sustain and nourish our faith. It demands a willingness to embrace vulnerability, to lay bare our fears and doubts before the throne of grace, and to trust that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. Moreover, trusting God in the waiting is an act of defiance against the spirit of this age, an affirmation that our hope is not anchored in fleeting pleasures or temporal comforts but in the unchanging character of God himself. It's a declaration of allegiance to a kingdom that transcends the boundaries of time and space, where every tear will be wiped away, and every sorrow will be turned to joy. In the words of the Apostle Peter, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you," 1 Peter 5 verse 7, NIV. This exhortation encapsulates the essence of Christian motivation in difficult seasons, to cast our cares upon the Lord, to release our grip on the illusion of control, and to trust that he who holds the universe in his hands is faithful to his promises. So, as we journey through the seasons of waiting, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who endured the cross, despising its shame, and is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Hebrews 12 verse 2, NIV. In him, we find the courage to persevere, the strength to endure, and the hope to press on, knowing that our waiting is not in vain but is leading us toward a future filled with the abundance of God's grace and the glory of his presence.